Hello and happy International Women's Day to you all. Thank you all for joining me for what I think is going to be a very interesting discussion. Before we begin, I might just get you to all introduce yourselves for the benefit of viewers who haven't come across you or your organisations before, as you'll be able to do them much more justice than I will. Maybe Kath, we could start with you.
Right, so my name is Katherine Deves. I am the mother of 3 little girls. I'm a lawyer in New South Wales, and I co-founded the group Save Women's Sports Australasia with a group of New Zealand women because we recognised that there was no organised critique of the policies that were allowing men and boys to play in female sports. So Save Women's Sports Australasia is now part of an international network of female athletes, women's organisations and our supporters who do not support the premise that males should be allowed to compete in female sports.
Thank you, Kath. Stassja?
I'm Stassja Frei. I founded the Coalition for Biological Reality. We started off as a Facebook group for Australians and New Zealanders who are concerned about gender identity laws infringing upon the rights and dignity of other groups like girls and women, LGBT people, and children. And I'm proud to say we just held our first event 2 weekends ago down in Hobart. And I like to think that, I do think that that was a success. So, yep, that's me.
Thank you, Stassja. Anna?
I'm Anna Kerr. I'm a founder and principal solicitor of Feminist Legal Clinic, which is a community legal service. We were based in Glebe in Sydney. I've practiced as a solicitor for 30 years. I specialise in domestic violence and discrimination law. But as a result of our work advocating for women's sex-based rights, the City of Sydney Council chose to terminate our tenancy in Glebe last year, and we were evicted. So this has impacted on us professionally in terms of the cases that we take on, because we're getting large numbers of cases on behalf of women who are being persecuted in this area. But also our own service has been impacted.
Thank you all so much for that. What I really like about this gathering is, firstly, you're all amazing in terms of the work that you're doing for women and girls. But secondly, I really like that we all seem to span across the political spectrum and I imagine operate within quite different paradigms. But despite our differences, we're able to collaborate and come together because today's topic is so important. Not sure if you want to talk about our political affiliations, or maybe we can just sort of leave it at that and people can kind of come to their own conclusions.
It's good because I know, because we are on different ends of the spectrum in some regards, and we do advocate for quite opposite things in some areas, like in relation to reproductive rights. And I think it's important for women to know that it's across the political spectrum. I mean, I'm actually a member of the Greens still. I'm obviously there's a fair bit of conflict that I'm having internally over this particular issue, but I am a member of the Greens, and I do consider myself very much somebody who's worked on the left side of politics. And I think that we're not getting any voice in this at all.
That's right. And I know, Kath, you're sort of about to or have thrown your hat into the kind of political arena a little bit.
Yes, I'm actually not really able to comment on that, except for the fact that, yes, I have joined the Liberal Party. So like everyone else, we're watching the space.
Okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Stassja, I'm not sure if you want to make a comment on this or...
Yeah, look, I've always voted left, Labor, Greens, even Socialist in the Senate a few times. So it's a very strange situation to feel really politically homeless, and I called myself a centrist for the first time ever a while back. And, I am tossing up, well, who do I vote for? We've got a federal election coming up quite soon. It'll be probably April or May, I imagine. And, who do I vote for?
It's a hard one, isn't it? I'm not affiliated with any particular party. I'm more of an issues voter, but like Kath, I'd be leaning sort of more conservative. So I think, here we've kind of got quite a good range, which is nice. but yeah, it's going to be difficult at the election, because on this issue in particular, I mean, like there's not really any strong voices apart from at this stage, Senator Claire Chandler, who's Liberal, but it's not like everyone in her party supports her like at all. So it's going to be very, very interesting. All right. Now that we've sort of aired that, all right. For some time, there's been a bit of an elephant in the room, as you all know, when it comes to International Women's Day. There's the question of, what exactly do we mean when we say woman, and how can we celebrate them and move things forward for them if we don't know what a woman is? There's this tension between the idea that a woman is what we've understood a woman to be for the last however millennia, a biologically female human being, and the idea that today a woman can include biological males who identify as women. And this tension has become more and more apparent because of the conflict that has arisen between the rights and interests of women on the one hand, and those of trans women, i.e. biological males who identify as women, on the other. Now, you're all very well aware of the many issues that arise and the challenges women face when woman is no longer a sex-based category, and I want to discuss these with you in the context of this year's International Women's Day theme, Break the Bias. Now, I sent you all a link to the theme. I think you've probably had a chance to have a look, but I might actually just read it out for the benefit of those who are watching. It's not too long, and I think, because I wouldn't actually mind just getting some comments on that in general as well. So the theme for this year's International Women's Day is Break the Bias, and it starts off by saying, imagine a gender-equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes and discrimination, a world that is diverse, equitable and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together we can forge women's equality. Collectively we can all break the bias. Individually, we're all responsible for our own thoughts and actions, all day, every day. We can break the bias in our communities. We can break the bias in our workplaces. We can break the bias in our schools, colleges and universities. Together, we can all break the bias on International Women's Day and beyond. Whether deliberate or unconscious, bias makes it difficult for women to move ahead. Knowing that bias isn't enough. Action is needed to level the playing field. Are you in? Will you actively call out gender bias, discrimination and stereotyping each time you see it? Will you help break the bias? All right. So clearly the bias, as we were saying before, being talked about is the bias that women face today vis-a-vis men in various facets of life, and there's no doubt still work to be done in many areas. But one kind of bias we've all seen in the issues we deal with in our respective organisations, which is much less likely to be the focus of International Women's Day, is the particular bias that seems to exist in favour of putting the rights and well-being of trans women or trans-identifying males above the rights and well-being of women in relation to a range of issues. Now, before we look at the areas of society where a bias seems to exist against women in favour of trans-identifying males and the implications of this for women, what did you think of this year's theme? Is there anything in particular that stuck out? And how are you feeling about International Women's Day more generally?
Who do you want to start?
Whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump in because I just was concerned that it was just so corporate, that whole website, and who set it up, who's behind it. And I don't know whether you know more about that, but when I had a look at it, it said that the purpose of this website is to support the supporters, and the supporters appear to be a number of large corporations, HCL, LinkedIn, John Deere, and then a whole lot of other sponsors, large corporations, and they've got these men profiled, and when you check them out, like I just had time to only have a look at a few of them, but their boards of directors are completely male dominated. It's just a sea of suits. Some of the organisations came up with no women. I mean, I only had to check about 3 before I found one that had no women on their board of directors. So this is just absolute nonsense. Women are just being sucked in. So, I mean, I just feel cynical about the entire thing. And I couldn't work out, what sort of democratic process is involved in this website being set up? Who's actually sets it up? Who's making the decisions about the theme? On the face of it, it's all motherhood statements. Like a lot of things, they sound okay until you scratch the surface and see who's sponsoring this, what are they trying to achieve, what's the direction they're moving women in. Yeah, I don't trust it. I don't know who's behind it and how it's organised. And I think I do know who's behind it: corporations. And I don't think that's what the women's movement's about.
It's a really interesting point.
Given that International Women's Day started with women unionising, didn't it? Women that were heavily involved in unions. Yeah, it's quite ironic that now it's corporates running the show. But I will say one word that really stood out for me in what you read out, Rachael, was an inclusive world. Now, every time I hear the word inclusive now, I just cringe.
Shivers up your spine.
Yeah, it's it's not talking about including women from different cultural backgrounds, immigrant women, women with disabilities. We know what they mean when they say inclusive. They mean including trans women. So very frustrating seeing that pop up there. Yeah.
How about you, Kath?
I think it all just sounds like a whole lot of platitudes and virtue signalling to say they're ticking the box to say, oh yes, we acknowledge International Women's Day, we're breaking the bias, we absolutely support women. But as it's pointed out, in practicality, they don't have women in leadership roles as an example. So as far as I'm concerned, it's just virtue signalling that's meaningless.
And I agree with Stassja. The word inclusivity, for those of us who are familiar with what's happening, it's a big alarm. I mean, it shouldn't be. I think for the average woman reading it, the word inclusive would be a positive. But for those of us who, we were evicted from our office on the basis of inclusivity, which was hilarious. It's a big.
That's right. It's definitely an alarm word. The word, another word which we're all used to now is the word gender, which was another one that kind of just jumps out because you're like, I think, what is it? I can't remember how it starts now, but it's a gender equal world or something like that. It's like, what do you mean by that? And then I guess the thing is, like, a lot of people these days, and I've definitely been guilty of this in the past, they use the word gender and sex interchangeably as if it's the same thing, which is very confusing and very deceptive. And language does matter, and they are not the same thing. And kind of making people sort of think that they are has, I think, been a huge kind of loss for us, because now, like, the idea that there is a biological sex is sort of just kind of slowly been erased in favour of this term gender, which also could mean sex or so the use of that word was sort of a little bit frustrating as well, I think.
Well, even our Attorney General, in their guidance on sex and gender, when you're writing policy, when you're writing legislation, they say you can use sex and gender interchangeably, even though they're conceptually distinct. And for anyone who has anything to do with policy or analysing statutes, as you said, words have meaning. Where punctuation is in contracts or in legislation can completely change its meaning. So to just pretend that two ideas that are not the same can be used interchangeably, I think it's reckless and it's lazy.
And it's completely illogical.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I thought a line that might have stood out to you, Kath, was the one near the end, which said something about how we've got to level the playing field. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah, level the playing field, which means allowing biological males to compete in women's sport. We all know what that's starting to mean. And one thing that I am noticing, particularly with reference to sport, is it's not just trans women anymore. It's now trans female.
Yeah.
And, they're using that to refer to people like Leah Thomas. And we all see Leah standing there in his onesie. And his whole body screams male. And we're supposed to say female. So they're just encroaching upon our language bit by bit. And it's just the whole thing's being rendered meaningless. We're going to be left with nothing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's right.
It's like they've redefined the word woman. So that's now a gender identity rather than referring to biological sex. But like you say, Kath, now we're seeing them also starting to grab the word female. And it's like, well, what word is there for us?
Actually, I can answer that. The swimming mother whose daughter is racing against Leah, in that interview we've all heard, rang up the ACLU to get some guidance. Clearly, she hadn't fallen far enough down the rabbit hole to understand that ACLU is on the side of trans. And they actually stated that they would never represent cis women against women. So we are now the minority. We're cis women, and they have women and female.
Yeah, and it's been imposed on us without any consultation. That's meant to be okay.
You know what's interesting as well, though? Like, we'll start sort of looking into some of the issues a bit more specifically after we kind of go through this a little bit more. But with the kind of the desire to have that word woman and now female and just sort of keep going until they basically have everything. What's also interesting is that when you look at the language they're using and things like, like the breastfeeding counsellors are having to now use, and that they're having to use, when it comes to pregnancy, it's all like they don't want to use the word woman. So it's sort of, I don't know, I just find that quite interesting because it's not inclusive enough. So it's like when they want it, they completely want it all. But when they, I don't know, it's just, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. But so, it's pregnant person, it's bodies with vaginas, it's menstruators, it's person with a uterus or whatever. There are all these sort of dehumanizing terms when it comes to, well, I guess it's the dehumanizing terms for woman, and then it's the womanly terms for the trans-identifying males. I guess that's how it is, isn't it?
There was a really terrible example of women's anatomy being referred to as a front hole, and a trans woman's neo-vagina being called a vagina. I can't remember where that was. It was some document produced by, trans activists. But, yeah, very dehumanizing, yeah.
Yeah, it feels like womanhood has been completely occupied, and we are now living in occupied territory. And I think that was very much displayed when we had the Coalition for Biological Reality down in Hobart, when they actually raised the trans flag above Hobart City Hall where we had our booking. And I would construe that. The mayor did it at the behest of trans activists, apparently without the knowledge or consensus of the rest of the council. And in my view, that is an actual hostile and aggressive act to say to us, we're just not welcome. So when they talk about inclusion, it's not us. We're not welcome in this inclusive world.
No, we're specifically excluded. This is the thing. It's so specific that TERFs aren't welcome, as they would put it. No TERFs here. So it's hilarious, really, that they use that word inclusivity when they're using it to expel people. Crazy.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of comes back to the theme again, because it's sort of like there's this bias to only be inclusive when it comes to trans women or trans-identifying males, but when it's biological women, and I've said to all of you I don't like having to use that phrase, but when it's biological women, we don't get the same treatment, it seems, in a lot of areas.
I think that the fact that we're having to, using that, they've already captured us, to some extent, that we feel the need. I mean, I'm trying to revert back to just saying woman and men who claim to be women. It's really hard to keep grounded because of this relentless push.
And there are just so many examples. Pride was obviously here in Sydney over the weekend, and again, massive corporate capture. When I looked at the list of floats, it is all the corporates, all the banks, the law firms, and so on. And I went and dug out some pictures when I went back in 1998, when everyone was still doing floats that they'd built in their backyards, and it was a big messy party at the Hordern. And I thought, wow, they've really sanitised it and turned it into a money-making machine. But they had it out at the cricket ground, the after party. And in the news today, they were saying that the ladies' pavilion that has been there since 1886 is now going to be renamed the Pride Pavilion, and all the toilets are going to be made gender neutral. So the men are now going to have extra toilet facilities, and any women who are showing up with their children are going to have to line up for the ladies, wherever they may be now.
Oh, that's outrageous. I hadn't seen that yet.
How
Wow.
inclusive. How inclusive.
Yeah, which is, and it's like actually the ladies' members stand and the members stand. It's like, well, why don't you turn the members stand into the pride and leave the ladies alone? Did you think of that? But so I'm suspecting there probably might be some pushback on that though, because, there's got to be conservative people within that, the Cricket Trust or those organisations who won't be happy about that takeover without any consultation.
So sad that we should have to rely upon conservative people to push back on something as fundamental as being women and not allowing our language to be taken from us so that we can still speak about being woman, being female, without having to torture ourselves with all this.
And talk about the bias, in the provision of facilities.
I was just going to say, no concern for women's needs. We have extra biological needs that need to be addressed by public toilets, and that's menstruation, and in some cases, miscarriage. Some women miscarriage in public. Do you want to be in a gender-neutral toilet and you can hear male voices just outside the door while you're going through that? I wouldn't want to. And even beyond that, men and women have sort of two very different ways of urinating. And so what happens in gender-neutral toilets is that women will go in there and there'll be urine all over the seat and all over the floor because a man can't be bothered lifting up the toilet seat. Why do we have to be subjected to that? How biased is that in favour of men, right?
Women are literally the ones who lose out on every level when it comes to the bathroom situation. I remember attending a seminar at Berkeley for a week. It was a couple of years ago now, and all of their toilets and changing rooms are all gender neutral or sex neutral or whatever you want to say. And I remember I was staying there for a week, so I was sleeping there and you had to use the showers, and obviously the shower, obviously you've got a door, but there are dudes walking around and you kind of you have to obviously make sure you get all changed and come out, and then you're kind of trying to use the mirror, but there are kind of guys walking past you, and it's just, it's not comfortable at all.
No.
And we know that people abuse those situations, obviously not every guy's going to do this and not every trans person's going to do this, but, with their cameras, there's just so many stories.
And with equitable provision of toilets, as Stassja said, we use the toilet in different ways. For menstruation, we are much more likely to have urinary incontinence, postpartum bleeding, that kind of thing. And also just the fact that we have more complicated clothes. We have to go in and shut the door and undress ourselves and sit down. So it takes us 3 times as long to use the toilet. So when they think they're providing equally on the basis of floor space, where you can fit 3 urinals into the floor space of 1 cubicle, our toilet should be 3 times as big with 3 times as many cubicles, and the men should be reduced to 1/3 of what it is. And that would be equitable provision of toilets.
And in fact, that's what the studies are saying, that we need more women's toilets. So, I would have thought one outcome would be that we retain the women's toilets that we have, and that we do have some mixed sex toilets available as well. And that would give women more options, and particularly for parents with children of the opposite sex, there is a need actually for mixed sex toilets. And that would, I think, solve this problem without having to encroach on women's needs for same-sex toilets. You could have mixed sex as well as, not instead of. Pretty obvious.
We could make the men's mixed sex and leave the women's alone. See how the men like that.
Have more toilets that women can access, I think, because if you go to the theatre or cinema, there's a queue for the women. There's not a queue for the men's, because of what we just discussed, that women take longer in the bathroom. So, we need more toilets anyhow. So they should start, when they're now putting in toilets, taking that into account and designing things accordingly. But unfortunately, it's going to go the other way. They're just going to make them all unisex, which is going to reduce safety. You're not going to be able to let your young children, even if you've got young girls. I would have been okay with sort of teenage girls going to the toilet without an adult, but now not so much. Whereas with the boys, I've got sons, I've always felt a bit nervous when they're young teenagers. I think, there's this awkward stage where you can't really take them into the women's toilet easily, but you're not too comfortable with them going to the men's toilet. I mean, I think the elephant in the room is the male, the fact that men are overwhelmingly responsible for violent and sexual crime. And, it's not all equal, because of that reality. If that wasn't true, well, then they might have an argument, but it is overwhelmingly true. Mm. And that, unfortunately, goes for men who claim to be women. The studies that have been done don't show that they suddenly stop offending like men. They continue to offend at the same rate statistically as the rest of the male population, there's even indications that they're actually overrepresented among sexual offenders in the prison system.
And the prisons are another very interesting topic, aren't they? Because you would all probably know more about this than I do. I think it's sort of different state by state, isn't it? Whether or not you can be in a prison depending on how you sort of identify. Is that right?
It would be state by state, yeah. I haven't done a study of it, but we do know, of course, that men are being held in women's prisons. Certainly it's happening in New South Wales. I think it's probably happening in most states now, because once you've recognised that a man is a female legally, well, then you've got no basis upon which to say he should be in a male prison. So the trouble is this legal fiction that they've created for to not cause distress for a small minority of people is now being manipulated by some of the most reprehensible criminals in the state to escape a male prison and enter women's prison.
That's the thing, and as you sort of said before, the elephant in the room is that men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators, of violence, of sexual violence, and women are overwhelmingly the victims. And there have been examples. I'm not sure about in Australia, but definitely overseas, where sexually violent criminals, biologically male, have been housed with women and who have actually assaulted them while incarcerated. So.
I do know a little bit about the Queensland situation with prisons, thanks to some work done by Steph Hughes, who runs Fair Go for Queensland Women. What she found was if a man has undergone sex reassignment surgery and changed his birth certificate to female, he's just counted as female in the prison population in Queensland. So they're not even tracking transsexual males in the prison system up there. So we don't have any idea how many transsexual males are in prison up there. But they do sort of track men who haven't updated their birth certificate, who are still legally male. They are counting them, but hopefully if Queensland gets self-ID laws, what she saw was those males who are trans-identified, who have committed sexual offences, if they were then counted in the female prison population, the number of female sexual perpetrators would, in one particular year, would have doubled the number of females convicted of sexual offences. That's how much it skews the data.
It's crazy. It reminds me of that article. Oh, sorry, I just want to say, it reminds me of that article from, I think it was from last year, when it was titled something about a female attacker, something, and it was a sexual assault, but it was actually a trans woman, so it was actually a male, and the whole article was represented as if a woman had carried out this like horrendous sexual assault. So it sort of, kind of ties in with that.
Yeah, that's happening all the time, and so that's skewing community perceptions as well about female crime. And I mean, it's easy to double the crime statistics for women in terms of violent and sexual crime, because actually the rate of violent and sexual crime by women is very, very low indeed. So it's easy for those figures to double, and this obviously serves the purposes of the men's rights movement, who want to pretend that women are equally culpable for violent crime, particularly domestic violence, as men. But this is absolute nonsense. And anyone who's doing the frontline work sees what's happening and what the domestic violence provisions are being manipulated by male perpetrators. They're being used against women. And so this is a very problematic. Meanwhile, the general public doesn't read about this. They don't realise that the fellow who, for instance, murdered the dog. I don't know if you saw that one. That's another case that I became aware of. And again, the headline was "Woman Murders Labrador," to hurt her partner. But of course, when I looked into it closely, it was a man, and the partner was a woman. So the general public's not to know the difference. How are they going to know that that's been tampered with, that headline, and the whole story is biased? Well, it's not biased, it's untrue.
It's wrong. It's almost like this whole rewriting of history type thing going on. Like, I don't know if you saw the thing with J.K. Rowling recently where I think it was in the subway somewhere, was it in New York or something, and there was some advertisement saying, kind of something along the lines of like, let's just forget who wrote Harry Potter, basically. Something like that. They basically wanted to just completely erase her because they don't like, her and what she stands for. They still like the stories, but I don't know, so you didn't see that. It was interesting. Anyway.
I did. I'm sure everyone saw that. It was crazy. But some people did some very funny ones in response with J.K. Rowling, imagining, what was it? Was it the Times or which newspaper?
Yeah, it was New York Times.
Yeah. I can't remember. But I did see that. I mean, it's just so malicious what they're doing, trying to erase their opposition. It's very sinister.
We see that throughout history where, women have been erased from the history books, from inventing things, from, participating in science. We hear about that all the time. I think, was it Hedy Lamarr? I think she was a film actress and she was also a scientist, and she pretty much invented the technology that underpinned Bluetooth and things like that. And no one knew that until recently when someone dug it up. But we know that women are often pushed off to the side, even in literature and art,
music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you name it. If you start looking, you can find remnants of the truth. A lot of the work that's attributed to men has actually been created by women, and then yeah, and I mean, look at it. You can see it happening in real time if you do Wikipedia editing. You can see how they go about it. That they stop us writing entries about women. They'll say, "Oh, this person's not notable enough," and you'll have a bunch of men saying that you can't write about that. There was one case where the woman, people had tried to write an entry for this scientist a number of times, and they'd said it wasn't notable enough, and it was only when she got the Nobel Prize that her entry was able to go up. So it's really, really hard for us, and I don't think many people realise the extent to which women's contributions are being censored.
Mm-hmm. I think in relation to the art and culture sector, in the UK, the National Portrait Gallery, only 2% of paintings have been produced by women.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
Well, that are hanging in the National Portrait Gallery. I'm sure there's lots of paintings that are gathering dust everywhere, but
I love that when I travel. I went, you go and you work out. I count the number of paintings by women, which is not that hard to do, sadly, in the National, not the Portrait Gallery, but the other one. And I counted, and then I made a complaint about the number of paintings. That it was, and I wish more people would do this. If they had enough, because and then I had a correspondence going with them about it, and it was a bit feeble. But yeah, they had a few more paintings out the back that they hadn't bothered to hang. But it was a tiny, like a handful, and crazy.
In terms of sort of censorship and erasure and all of that, have all of you noticed, have you sort of seen, I guess, a bias when it comes to media reporting on issues to do? It's a bit of an obvious question, but I don't know if any examples come to mind or if you've seen anything recently. But yeah, have you noticed a bias in the media when it comes to reporting, I guess, issues to do with trans inclusion versus, women and how they're treated?
Absolutely. I think all you need to do is Google ABC queer, and someone did it recently. A woman called Kit Kowalski. She writes a blog. well worth looking that up. But what she did was she entered a search term, I think it was transgender, in the ABC's website, and she put in the time period of something like 2 weeks, and they had produced 35 articles that were positive in favour of transgender people, without really any discussion of the impact on girls and women. I think, though, in there was one article by Professor Patrick Parkinson where he went in depth, like it was essay length, about the religious discrimination bill, and sort of pulled that apart and made the point that it was actually a Labor government that had included this little section in the Sex Discrimination Act that would allow single-sex schools to expel trans children, which none of the schools had ever taken up. Apparently it's never actually happened. So that was the only article, and it was an opinion piece that was sort of on our side. Yeah, well, was on our side. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, was he in favour of that bill, though?
I would say that he is, because he's
yeah, we've got to be careful with that. I wouldn't personally consider that bill on our side. I mean, I thought it was a bill which made the issue. I mean, I think we had two extreme groups represented in that whole debate. We had the conservative Christians and the gender ideologues, and the feminists didn't get a word in. I mean, I don't support either of those. I wrote submissions against the bill, very strongly against the bill. And I think it's important to know that, I mean, that bill wouldn't have helped, for instance, Feminist Legal Clinic exclude a person, because I wouldn't have been able to say, or like on the basis of my religious belief, that I don't think, you know, if I base it on science, for instance, that's not going to get me anywhere under that bill. So I personally didn't like the bill at all. And I think it also did damage to our cause in terms of making it seem to be this divisive question, whereas I think what we're really talking about is just simple, you know, common sense and biology, that we do know what men and women are, and mangling the language and mixing it up to try and save the feelings of a few people is going to cause far more problems and far more harm than
Well, we have single-sex schools, not single gender. So even if you had a boy who was, you know, transitioning to a girl, why would they expel him? Because he's still a boy.
Yeah.
You know, it might be that they don't let him enroll in the girls' school, and rightly so. You know, if you're sending your daughter to...
a real issue. I think it was very misreported in the media. ABC kept talking about this expelling of trans kids, but it's more that they would be obliged, if they have a child at school, to allow them to use the girls' toilets. If a male wants to use the girls' toilets, that they'd be obliged to go along with that, regardless of, you know, how the parent group feels about it, and that they'd be obliged to accept into their school a male who claims to be a female, even if it's a girls' school. So, you know, I thought it was very misleading reporting, as usual. They didn't want to really make the issue clear, and they made it sound so, you know, it's always, no one wants to expel kids from school. So yeah,
that's the thing. It's the way it's always framed with a particular narrative in mind, which is, I think, the point I was making before, which is that unfortunately, when it comes to looking at trans issues and women's issues together, and there's never sort of really any acknowledgement that there is a tension or a conflict there. It's sort of, the way it's framed is just, you know, this is a trans rights issue and this is about inclusion, and then again the women and girls just sort of seem to be forgotten. And I think one of the best examples of that in recent weeks has been Senator Claire Chandler's Save Women's Sports Bill. I mean, we would have all seen the media coverage of that, and I think apart from a few articles in The Australian, all of it was just this massive pile-on about how transgender people were going to be excluded from sport, which is obviously, if you actually read the bill, is not the case at all. It's about, you know, implementing single-sex sport where clubs want to be able to do that without fear of any legal action against them. And yeah, all the articles that I saw, I don't know if you saw any others apart from the ones in the Oz, but they all were just sort of saying how horrible this was and how this is really going to be very harmful for trans people. And we lost Kath, have we?
Looks like it.
To get her back here so she can talk about her thoughts on that. But yeah, so that's, I think that's just, yeah, I mean, look, there are so many examples, but I think it was so bad though over the last few weeks that I think even the ordinary person could have looked at that coverage and sort of thought, wait a second, like, is it, I think they could have.
I don't think that people realise what's actually being discussed. I don't think they realise that, because it's done so superficially, the coverage. Oh, not letting trans people play sport. Well, who would agree with that? That's terrible. I mean, and that's the level at which it was reported and the level at which people understood it. That, oh, that's bad that people want to exclude trans people from playing sport. They didn't discuss that this is about men being able to claim overnight, potentially, that I'm now a woman and I'm going to have to play, in your daughter's team or your wife's team, and then I think there would maybe be a bit more of a resistance. But the reason it wasn't reported is, of course, because we've got really very severe censorship happening. I mean, no one's allowed to report these things honestly with a bit of balance, because the press council will jump on them if they do so. Yeah. So that's a real problem in the system, that it's complete bias.
Absolutely, and it's so out of touch with what ordinary people actually think on the sports issue. And we know that from a poll that was commissioned by the group Binary, that, what was it, 75% of Labor voters, 78% of Liberal voters, even 55% of Greens voters are all in favour of keeping women's sports just for women. So it's really mind-boggling that the media is so out of touch with what Australians really think on this issue. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, I think Kath is back. You lost you there for a moment.
I think it must be the storm.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, maybe it is actually. All right, we've got you back. Stassja was just saying it's mind-boggling how out of touch the media are when it comes to the women's sport issue, because the ordinary person, she was referring to a poll that Binary did, I think, last year, which showed that the ordinary person generally thought that there should be single-sex sport for women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember the other day, Stassja, we were talking about a news.com.au poll, which was just after the whole Leah Thomas thing. And I think, just after that, but also during when Senator Chandler introduced her bill, and overwhelmingly the response to that, despite the way they'd framed it, which was very biased and very sort of like, they were obviously angling for a particular answer. The answer they still got in any event was that, no, there should be single-sex sport for women. So, we were just saying it's sort of crazy how out of touch the media are, but is it that they're out of touch, or is it that they just have a very particular narrative that they want to push and they don't care actually what the ordinary person thinks?
I think it's probably a combination of both. I mean, the polling, it was independent. It was funded by Binary. I mean, I looked into getting some polling done, and it was many thousands of dollars. We just don't have the resources. So Binary did, and it was independent, and it demonstrated even the Greens were at 55% in support of having a dedicated female sports category. I'm not quite sure what Labor said. I think they were pretty up there. They were nearly 3/4, and the highest group was One Nation. But and I would hazard a guess that those numbers would be even higher if people understood that there wasn't any sort of surgery or hormonal requirement. So when we saw those pieces from Van Badem and from Peter Fitzsimons just leaping on board the trans train and saying anyone who was against it was, the usual bigot, unkind, and so on, that was grossly unfair. And, I don't think it was reporting. I think they were op-eds as pieces, but people were sort of treating them as if that actually was reflective of the population, and it's just simply not. So I think they're being really, again, just really reckless. They're not being impartial. They're not holding to journalistic integrity whatsoever. It's really disappointing. And when we win this battle, they're going to have to eat their words. We're going to remind them. Because, Peter Fitzsimon was a rugby player. Does he honestly think he can play with the women, or equally if there was a woman on his team? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just
Some of them
crazy.
genuinely think that they're on the side of good. And I think the other thing is, and I do question how that's possible, because of but perhaps they think that the hormones have more impact than they do. But there's plenty of research out there. World Rugby has some very good research, and they came out quite clearly that, it doesn't matter if they've taken hormones for a bit, that it doesn't counteract all the other effects of being male. It just doesn't make it safe. But I think, in fairness to some of the journalists, I think there is tremendous pressure on them. I think every time there was a front page article in the Sydney Morning Herald about the impact of erasing the language, of mother and breastfeeding. 12 academics had done a study, and that got front page in the Sydney Morning Herald. I was quite impressed. But I believe that the journalist in question has come under tremendous pressure since. So this is the thing, and they really, so I think there's a lot of fear. So on the left side of politics, on the right side of politics, the right is divided. If you look at the Liberal Party, it's clearly divided on this. Claire Chandler's bill should have been a government bill, but Claire Chandler clearly only had some support. And as we know, with the religious discrimination bill, it didn't have complete support by the government. So the Conservative side of things is divided. And on the left, there's absolute capture. And of course, the Labor and the Greens are not as able to have dissent, which I guess that might be an issue in terms of their structure. But if they and people are very concerned about being, looking like they're a bigot, and people on the left want to be progressive. They want to be kind and compassionate. And unfortunately, this is the ridiculous thing, is that there's nothing kind about this. This is the opposite of kind. Like the numbers of children who are being harmed. We're all going to have to hang our heads in shame. Well, actually, I have to say that we've at least been trying to do something about it. But most of the population is going to have to hang their heads in shame about the number of children who have been sterilised and mutilated, while in the thrall of this ideology. And I don't know. So people like Peter Fitzsimmons and others, Van Adam, I don't know how they're going to answer those things in the future. I think it's going to be very tough.
And we also know, these media outlets are signed up to ACON's Pride in Diversity, Pride in Sport, and so on. So they have a commercial vested interest to report favourably on the ideology. And as we know, if they are seen to have any negative press, they can earn, I think it's 200 points over the course of a calendar year. If they have negative press, they can lose 25 points. So they have a conflict of interest. They are not able to report impartially on that basis. So if they're going to prioritise their Australian Workplace Equality Index score that they get through being a Pride and Diversity member over impartial journalism, and that's what they're going to prioritise, then this is where we find ourselves.
What's the score get them? So what? They just look like
a rainbow tick.
Just a tick. That's right. So, in a sense, it's just like in the UK, once Stonewall has been exposed for what it really is, everyone's starting to move away from Stonewall. So, who wants a rainbow tick? I'd be ashamed to have a tick from a group that is advocating for the sterilisation of kids.
So I think, they have different levels of membership: gold, silver, bronze, whether you're a founding member. But as Kit Kowalski has uncovered in her research, it's not that you get over 175 out of 200 and suddenly you're gold. It's just the top 10 performers in that year. So it's not like you ever achieve anything. You've got a year on year constantly, and you're battling yourself, you're battling the other organisations to be at the top of the ladder. So
I think
you can never do enough.
I think it's very much the equivalent of getting a gold star, like we used to get in primary school. But at least in primary school, that actually meant something, But it's just what you're saying about the media's being in bed with ACON. SBS are corporate they have a corporate partnership with ACON on the Pride in Sport stuff. So, SBS are producing marketing material in the form of videos for ACON, and there's just no way they can be impartial on this.
But yeah, talk about bias. So we are never going to get unbiased coverage until that relationship comes to an end.
I think also within the ABC and SBS and media organ, there's this false consensus going on, and there probably are a hell of a lot of journalists and just ordinary employees that agree with our views, that know that this has gone too far, and at some point there is going to be a reckoning where those people start to speak out and reclaim these media outlets from the grasp of the trans lobby. I think it will happen eventually. Yeah,
I wonder what it will take. I mean, we're getting a lot of, every time women speak out, of course, they're losing their jobs or they're having their employment threatened. So this is, there's a lot of people who would like to blow the whistle on this, and I've sort of approached the New South Wales Ombudsman to try and put into play the whistleblower protections, but they've knocked us back on that. So, this is the trouble. The Ombudsman, of course, New South Wales Ombudsman, have also had the ACON training. So, everything's captured. So how do we turn this around? Because people are really fearful for their employment. Very, very difficult situation.
Sometimes I wonder if it's going to be, just saturation point, where they've just got so much, there's nowhere further to go. They can't stick another rainbow on anything. You're going to get to that false consensus tipping point where enough people look at each other and just say, I don't believe in this. So I think that we have, like with McCarthyism, when that gentleman stood up and said, "Have you no shame, sir?" And McCarthyism fell down. So I think it's just going to take people continuing to speak out, and we're just going to hit that saturation point.
But how long is it going to take? I mean,
it's a long battle, because we see with the children, it's going to take years, if not decades, and then the litigation. I think that will be the pointy end of the resistance when those kids come out the other end. And then just women, when women wake up one day and look around and just realise they have nothing left. But then how do we regain all that?
Do you think with the issue of children, it's just there's not enough awareness and not enough education? Because I would have thought with the issue of children, like that should have been like the kind of line in the sand for a lot of people. The fact that, little kids who are confused about, how they're feeling about their bodies are then sort of pushed through on this sort of conveyor belt, basically, maybe you should be a boy or maybe you should be a girl or whatever, and then are then face sort of completely life-altering surgeries, hormonal treatments and so on. Like, I would have thought that would have been a line in the sand for a lot of people. I don't know, it's because people just don't know about it, or they just don't understand the repercussions.
I think it's they don't know about it because we don't have enough detransitioners who are able, emotionally able to speak out in our media. There's a lot of stuff available on YouTube if you look for it, and there's stuff internationally, but that's not getting picked up by our local media. So we're just not getting those stories about it. Instead, what we're getting is all the feel-good stories about trans people. We're not getting the other side of it at all. It's just being completely censored.
Well, I think France have now stepped away from medicalising children. So sometimes I wonder if it's going to come from within, the sensible practitioners asking questions, or if it's going to come from the medical insurers who are going to see the potential of massive class actions and start asking questions.
I think the doctors are already getting a bit more careful. So I think you're right, that just if it gets out there that there was any litigation at all, the doctors who've been prescribing. But I mean, ACON, of course, on their website is encouraging people to get prescriptions from their GPs without any mental health assessment. So the fact that the psychiatrists seem to they're being more conservative, I think. And I think there's a few people we know who've been active in trying to influence the psychiatrists to think about what they're doing. But now the GPs are able to just put them straight on the hormones. ACON is encouraging that.
I have heard of some people's reaction when they hear about what's happening to children, and it's, oh my God, I had no idea that they were giving them cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers, and in some cases surgeries, and so ordinary people, when they hear this, I think they are really quite shocked. So I think, Rachel, what you said, the lack of awareness, I think that is probably a large part of the issue at the moment, is people just don't know that it's happening. Yeah.
And I guess that kind of comes back to what we were saying before about all the censorship. Like, how are we supposed to sort of get the message out there when it's just constant silencing and abuse and termination of employment and all of that if you dare speak out about any of these issues? It's sort of, it's very difficult.
And the media needs stories. They want people, and it's hard to give it to them because the people who've experienced this are really quite traumatized, and that's very tricky. So the women, that includes the women who are losing their jobs, who have had their jobs threatened. Most of them, don't want to go public, not with their face. And it's in order for it to be a story, they like to have the visual. They like to be able to photograph and put it on, and it's too damaging for the individual.
Well, I don't blame them, because once you make yourself a target, once you put yourself out there, we've all received hate mail, death threats, rape threats, and so on. And getting back to the bias question, you look at that campaign that was released today, being spearheaded by, Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins and a whole lot of other high-profile women. And do you think any of them have ever come out in defence of any of us, or in defence of any of the women who do cop abuse, like Nicole Flint? She posted something the other day, and I've just been watching that play out on Twitter, and the amount of hatred and just vile commentary, just cruel things that they say to her. For some reason, she attracts a lot of it, and none of those women standing there patting themselves on the back today have ever said anything in defence of Nicole. And it's because, I don't know, maybe she's a conservative woman, she has made gender critical comments publicly. So the support that they are willing to provide is incredibly biased. If we're not on their message, we don't get any of that. We don't get any of the recognition. We don't get any of the resources. We don't get any of the invitations, because we're not pandering to the narrative. Yeah. So I think when they talk about diversity and inclusion, they're really, it's not at all. It's as long as you follow the orthodoxy, then you very much get the attention and the resources. But if you step out of line, you're on your own. No support for you.
I mean, it's just like those psychological experiments, the Ash conformity experiment. If there's one person and they're the only one, they'll end up compromising their judgment just to not stand out from the group. So people need to know that they're going to get backup when they speak out. And unfortunately, because there's only so few of us, I mean, relatively, there's very few of us speaking out. So it's very, very scary. But it's self-fulfilling, because the more women speak out, then it won't be scary anymore. So it's kind of, how do you convince people, just speak up? I don't know if you've ever addressed a group. Like I've certainly addressed a group of women on this. And, if you could just get one more person, two more people, then you might sort of get the momentum. But if you're a sole voice, no one's going to take that risk.
It's really hard. I recently got a woman, adult, human, female T-shirt, and I wore it out to a pub in Hobart while I was there the other weekend, and
brave.
And I'm a bit embarrassed, but I'm a smoker. So I walk outside to the smoking section alone, wearing my woman, adult, human, female T-shirt, and suddenly I felt like a target. And there was a table of people, and I could see them. They kept turning their head. I don't know, and I still don't know if they were looking at me and talking about me, or whether they were looking at someone beyond me and talking about them. But so I understand how difficult it is to speak out, and I was standing there and I was like, shit, what am I going to do if someone has a go at me? I'm here by myself. I'm going to have to, use my voice and stand up for myself. And I can transfer all of that to the workplace, and how much harder it would be in the workplace to stand up for these values. So I get it.
You need the income to support your family.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it is hard for people who need the livelihood, but I do think people who don't have that I think we need more women to be speaking out. A lot of women aren't doing it just because they don't want to be unpopular, but that's not really, when there's so much at stake. I think the time has come that women need to be speaking out.
Absolutely.
So we need to all get those T-shirts started. I think Graham Linehan's idea that we have a particular day where everyone comes out at once, there was a date, wasn't there? I think it was in November or December. I think we probably really should organise for that and do that and see if we can't get the momentum that we need.
Yeah.
Do you all feel like there have been more women speaking out on this issue though over sort of say the last maybe few years or so?
Definitely. The IWD Brisbane Meanjin weekend, we had 3 full days of presentations, from morning till afternoon, whereas the first time I went, it was only 1 day. So there definitely are way more people speaking out. Stassja, you've started doing so. Rachael, you've started doing so as well. And I think it's only been, Anna's been at it for a lot longer than all of us. And I'm sure maybe Anna could say something about the addition of voices.
Oh, well, I think, there's slow but steady, I would say. I feel like what we need is a major rush of people doing it. But there's slow but steady. People, I get contacted. There's always new people contacting me all the time. But we're also getting a lot of people who are speaking out, but then having to retreat. That's no good. So the level of pushback is getting worse and worse as well.
Sort of 1 step forward, 2 steps back or something like that. Probably not quite that bad, but yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We've got a couple of these cases. The other thing is it's people in key places as well, like within the medical profession and legal profession, who need to also make some changes, because at the moment the laws, it is hazardous, for instance, to try and maintain a single-sex place, space or service. And, people are asking me for advice, can I have a single-sex space? Well, there's no easy, quick answer to that at the moment, because realistically, even though the way I interpret the laws, of course you can, but the claims will be made, and unfortunately, that takes a toll on people already. So you see, it's the threat is already enough. It's just like domestic violence. It's not just about, of course it's illegal to assault someone, and once somebody's assaulted, but the thing is, it's the threat that is, makes women comply because of the anxiety that will happen. So, and it's the same with this, the threat that something nasty will happen if you speak out is enough for women to go, oh no, I won't wear that T-shirt today. And no, I won't say anything, even though I don't think that person should enter this service, because of the threat of what will happen if you actually just speak out.
Yeah.
That's fear. But unfortunately, in the end, it's the same thing. It's just fear. And I consider, I won't go as far as throwing around the word violence the way they do, but it's certainly fear of abuse. And I think the fear of violence is there as well. I certainly had one client who was going to speak out to the media about what had happened, and then said to me, "Oh, they might burn down my business." And so it is fear of violence, because in the end, that's what underlies it.
Yes. Here in Melbourne, we've got a trade union organised International Women's Day rally on tomorrow afternoon, and I am afraid that it's going to get ugly, that people might get hurt. Last year, a woman who attended with, and she uses a walking stick to get around, had her walking stick kicked out from under her. So, there is that possibility there. Yeah.
And increasingly legislation with penalties, imprisonment. The conversion therapy kind of legislation that we're seeing in Victoria, for instance, which has, I think, up to 10 years imprisonment for a health professional who questions the affirmation model, who says to a young person, are you sure, is this really what you should be doing? If you go that direction now as a health professional in Victoria, you're looking at a potential prison sentence. So as a result, they're not going to see those children anymore. They're not going to go to anyone because it's too hazardous. And so you've just deprived an entire generation of Victorian children of any sensible counselling that they might be able to get. The only counselling they'll get is not counselling at all. It's just giving them hormones. So they have to be affirmed the moment they come in the door. There's no discussing why they might feel that way. That's not allowed.
And it's girls that are going to be most affected by that. We know that it's the numbers have flipped around, and it's now 75% girls who are presenting with gender dysphoria. It hasn't been that in previous decades, so we know that it's going to be girls that are disproportionately harmed by this crazy affirmation model. Yeah.
And what's so frustrating is that, there's research being done about the reasons for why that's the case, because of backgrounds of sexual abuse or because of backgrounds of family dysfunction or whatever it is. But again, like Anna was saying, that you can't actually question these things or go into these things. You have to just affirm the gender that they tell you they think they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very shocking. Yeah.
And of course, the Victorian legislation tries to have reach into other states as well, so that if you try to take a child for counselling in another state, you can already be in trouble. Or if a health professional in another state advertises a different type of counselling, and that influences children in Victoria or people in Victoria, then they will also try to bring a claim against you potentially.
Yeah.
And it's a real star chamber. That legislation is particularly frightening, the Victorian conversion therapy stuff. And it's quite the opposite from what it says. It's like doublespeak out of George Orwell, because, the conversion therapy, the real conversion therapy, is getting kids who are a little bit confused and uncomfortable with their bodies and maybe their sexuality. Perhaps they might be thinking that they might be gay or lesbian, and telling them, oh, no, actually, you're the opposite sex. Here, take some puberty blockers and some hormones and have a mastectomy or whatever, and that's the ultimate conversion therapy, and yet they've twisted it around the other way. It's crazy.
Absolutely, yeah. The word Orwellian has been rattling in my mind as we've been speaking. It's just so backwards, and the Ministry of Truth parallel with what's going on. It's terrifying, and people are buying this, and I'm often just so shocked. I just shake my head and go, "It's crazy! It's all crazy." That's like the only words I can get out. Yeah. Sorry.
And the thing is, it really spans across sort of all facets of life, because you've got the most tragic situation, which you're talking about, which is these children, and then you've got all the other areas we talked about, sports, changing rooms, employment, all of that, right to like the very sort of most absurd thing, which is biological males now being able to win women's awards, which they've been doing for years, but now in New South Wales specifically, we saw this got announced last year, but I think it's this week, is it? The first New South Wales Woman of the Year award will now be open to those who identify as women, i.e. trans-identifying males. So it sort of goes from the kind of just really tragic and horrendous to the absolutely absurd.
Well, I'm going up to Noosa tomorrow to watch a women's surfing competition, and there is a male competing. His name is Stassja Jane Lowison, and he's in his 40s. Apparently, a couple of the other competitors they don't mind that. They've said they don't mind that he's there. They think that they're better because in women's surfing, it's not necessarily about like strength and brawn. It's about balance and flexibility and that kind of thing. But my response to that is, well, whose spot did he take though? It's like, I hope you beat him. I hope the girls win. But it's also, he's taken the spot of another woman in the competition. And what about all the qualifying events? And what about the fact it's just going to look ridiculous? Having a middle-aged, 6 foot whatever man standing there with all the young women. It's absurd.
We have to get the message out to women that when they try to be reasonable and accommodating, so that, and that, you know, compassionate, reasonable, accommodating, that they're actually doing harm. Because every time we let this through, we're making it harder, you know, to stop it elsewhere. And there will be someone, there is always someone who's going to miss out or be hurt. And so it's not an act of kindness, it's an act of cowardice. But, you know, sadly, women do think that they're just being kind. That's the whole thing. Be kind, be kind. This isn't kind. I don't think it's even kind to the individual who's claiming to be a woman, a man who's claiming to be a woman. I mean, I don't think there's anything kind about lying to people personally. I mean, I'm not saying you need to be unkind and rude about how you address someone, but I don't actually, I mean, I've had to deal with lots of clients who have mental illness, and, you know, and some of them have got real substantial delusions, and I still haven't found it necessary to lie to them and go along with the delusions. I mean, I think it's okay to, you know, I think it's actually important to tell them that you don't think that that's right, that that's not real. I mean, I think that's actually much more helpful to tell them that gently than to go along with it. I mean, that's just, I think that's quite pathological. If someone tells you something completely nuts and crazy and you go, oh yeah, you're right. I mean, that's not kind.
Yeah. No, spot on. Yeah.
I think we're going to sort of see that a lot more as time goes on with the different detransitioners who come out to tell their stories about how, you know, their hormonal treatments or their surgeries didn't actually address the issues that they were struggling with. And actually, for a lot of them, it's made it a lot worse. And obviously, as you'll know, we've already got a lot of stories out there like that. You know, we've got Kerr in the UK, and she's probably one of the most high-profile ones. But yeah, as time goes on, as we were saying before, this is still early days for these treatments. As time goes on, there'll be more and more of these stories that come out. And as Anna's saying, we'll realise that actually it wasn't kind to you know, affirm the gender that they thought that they were they thought they were, and to sort of tell them that they could be something other than they are, biologically speaking. So yeah. But I think we've probably covered just about every issue we could. I know we could obviously say a lot more about all of them, but I think probably need to let you wrap it up, because I know Kath and Stassja especially have had a very busy weekend with International Women's Day events. So I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for joining me this evening. It was a very, very interesting discussion. Hopefully we can do it again sometime. And just thank you so much for all the wonderful work you're doing to stand up for women and girls, and to stand up for the importance and the reality of biological sex in our society. Hopefully with time, more awareness will be raised and more education will be done, and more people will be able to see how important this issue is.
Thanks, Rachel. And thanks for all the work you do as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to Women's Forum for hosting us.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much, all. Take care.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.